Well, our project is a research project with about 18 or 19 people working on it, which is comparing Russia and China, their political economies. And we've decided to work on the border between the two of them in Northeast Asia, because they face each other there, and you can really see how very, very different these countries are. Well, I'd like to draw attention to four things. One of them is that China and Russia have very different attitudes to borders as such. So for China, borders are kind of like an opportunity. They can see over the border and they can think, well, what can we do over there? For Russia, the border is a line of sovereignty and state control, and it's a question of security. The border is unchangeable, and it's a far more defensive view of the border. And so that leads to a very different economic development on either side, because on the Russian side you have these limited zones, so that it's very difficult for people to go in there and invest and develop. And on the Chinese side it's much less centralized, and there's more local initiatives, and there's sort of free zones of trade and so on. And so basically the picture on that border is of abundance on the Chinese side. Big cities, lots of people, lots of merchandise, and sort of absence of anything on the Russian side. Little villages, not much population, nothing much produced. So that leads on, I think, to a third element, which is that migration flows between the two countries, because the Russians are very scared in a way of the Chinese zillions of people sitting there, as it were, might come into Siberia and take it over. That seems highly unlikely to happen according to our project, mainly because the Russians have actually got this very defensive borderline, and they don't let many Chinese in. But in fact it's a missed opportunity, because with the Chinese labor they could have developed Siberia, and it also would have been good for the people on the Chinese side who want the work and the money. And then the fourth thing I think is interesting about our project is that there are, besides Russian and Chinese people, there are a lot of indigenous people who live along that border, who've lived there for centuries, and for whom the border is not important at all. And so some of them have developed a kind of trans-border identity. You know, we can move across, we can contact people on the other side, that side. But because Russia and China were at loggerheads for a long time, the border was actually sealed for at least 30 years. You couldn't cross easily. And so there are other of these indigenous people, like the Nanai, who've basically turned into two different peoples. They don't sort of recognize each other, they don't have contacts, and so that they're sort of Chinese citizens and Russian citizens of the same indigenous ancestry, but it's sort of disappearing. So I think that's an interesting process. Well, I think it's a very distant area for the UK, and there isn't very much sort of UK investment in that area. But I do think it's very important from the kind of political strategic point of view that it's a key area in sort of relations between China, Japan and Russia, and of course Korea, North Korea. So part of our project is on the North Korean border. I think the other thing is that both China and Russia have a big world global public presence, particularly in the media. They kind of project themselves as this kind of country and that kind of country. And our project has got lots of little micro studies that will really reveal the truth, you know, what is not said, what's hidden, or the real life that people lead.